He was still wearing his uniform when it happened. Pressed flat against a car door, wrists forced behind his back, medals scraping metal as a stranger with a badge decided he did not belong in them. To the officer, he was not anything official at all. Just another lie waiting to be exposed. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, consider subscribing. Now let's proceed. The afternoon heat hung heavy over the gas station as Jake Douglas pulled in, engine ticking as it cooled. He had taken this route 100 times. Stop at the same station, then grab some chips and some juice boxes. Then finally, get home before dinner. His kids would be waiting, already arguing over flavors, already asking if he brought the good ones. Jake stepped out in his white dress uniform, crisp and immaculate despite the long drive. 3 tours overseas had trained him to notice everything. The angles of parked cars, the mirrored glass of the storefront, the way a few heads turned and lingered a second too long. Then suddenly, someone lifted a phone inside the station. Outside, a patrol car idled with its lights dark. Officer Leighton Wade had been sitting nearby, restless, watching the lot more than the pumps. The department had fielded a string of calls about military impersonators in recent weeks. Men wearing borrowed honor for attention or favors. Wade had been itching to catch one. When he saw the uniform, his suspicion hardened into certainty. Too clean. Too confident. Too many ribbons. His mind did the rest. Jake crossed the concrete toward the entrance, the smell of fuel sharp in the air. He had just reached for the door when the cruiser rolled forward, blocking his vehicle at the pump. The door opened. Boots hit the ground. The voice came fast and loud. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." Jake paused, turned slowly, hands visible. "Is there a problem, officer?" Wade did not answer the question. He closed the distance, eyes scanning the uniform like a checklist. "Where did you get that?" "My uniform," Jake said evenly. "United States Navy." Wade snorted. "That's so. We have reports of people stealing military uniforms around here. Impersonation. You fit the description." Jake felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the kind that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with control. "My military ID is in my pocket. You can verify it." "Do not reach for anything," Wade snapped. His hand hovered near his holster. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Jake hesitated, not out of defiance but calculation. He scanned the windows and caught his reflection in the car door, the bright white fabric stark against the dark glass. He thought of his kids. He thought of the cameras that were now unmistakably pointed in his direction. He turned and placed his palms against the vehicle. "This is unnecessary," he said. "I am cooperating." Wade grabbed his arm, twisting it higher than needed. The metal of the door pressed cold into Jake's cheek. His medals scraped and clicked as Wade forced his wrists together. Pain flared sharp and sudden, not enough to break him, but enough to make the message clear. "You think wearing a costume makes you untouchable," Wade said, breath hot with anger. "You people think you can walk around above the law." "I served this country," Jake said through clenched teeth. 3 tours. You can check." "Shut up," Wade barked. "Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Jake replied, louder now, for the phones behind him. "My hands are behind my back. You are hurting me." The cuff snapped closed. The sound carried across the lot. Someone gasped. Someone swore. The phones stayed up. Wade leaned in close, voice low and hard. "You are being detained for stealing a military uniform and impersonation. We will sort it out at the station." Jake exhaled slowly, the way he had been trained to when the moment threatened to spin out of control. He stared at the reflection in the glass, at the uniform he had earned inch by inch, at the officer who had decided none of it was real. Around them, the gas station buzzed on, pumps clicking, engine starting. An ordinary place suddenly turned into something else. Wade tightened his grip and guided Jake the last few steps until his shoulder met the car with a dull thud. The metal vibrated under the impact. Jake absorbed it without a sound, jaw clenched, breath measured. He felt the officer's weight press into him, deliberate and unnecessary, a show meant for whoever was watching. "My ID is in my left pocket," Jake said. "You can take it out yourself." Wade did not answer. He shifted his stance, planting his feet wider, forearm across Jake's upper back. The pressure increased, forcing Jake to bend forward until his chest was nearly flush with the door. The car window caught his reflection, eyes narrowed, expression fixed in control. This was not new to him. Force without reason. Authority without listening. I said don't move, Wade snapped, even though Jake had not moved at all. I am not moving, Jake replied. You asked for compliance. I am complying. Wade reached down, fingers brushing the pocket, then pulled his hand back as if burned. I don't need to see anything, he said. I know what this is. Jake felt the cuffs bite tighter as Wade adjusted them again, ratcheting one notch further for emphasis. Pain flashed through his wrists. He let it pass. He knew better than to react. Any sound, any shift, would be used against him. Across the lot, a woman near the ice cooler stopped walking. She had been halfway to her car when the first shout rang out. Now she stood still, phone already in her hand, screen pointed toward the scene. Olivia Curtis had planned to be in and out. Coffee. Ice. Home. Instead she framed the shot carefully, zooming just enough to catch the uniform, the officer's face, the way Jake was bent forward against the vehicle. Hey, she said, voice shaking but loud enough to carry. He's not doing anything. Wade turned his head sharply. Ma'am, step back. I'm just recording, Olivia replied. I'm allowed to do that. Jake heard her words and felt a small shift inside his chest. Not relief. Awareness. Someone else was here now. Someone who would remember this exactly as it happened. Wade leaned closer to Jake, voice low. You trying to get people to feel sorry for you? I'm trying to get you to check my ID, Jake said. Wade grabbed the fabric at Jake's shoulder and shoved him harder into the door. The metals clinked again, sharper this time. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. Olivia took a step closer, camera steady. You don't have to slam him like that. Wade ignored her. He patted Jake down roughly, hands lingering longer than needed, then finally reached into the pocket. He pulled out the ID, flipped it once, twice. His eyes scanned the name. The photo. The seal. People fake these, he said, holding it up but not offering it back. Seen it before. You can call it in, Jake said. There's a number on the back. Wade shoved the card into his own pocket instead. I will. He pushed Jake's head down again, forcing him to look at the pavement. Jake tasted dust, the grit scratching his tongue. He focused on breathing, slow and even, counting the seconds the way he had learned to under pressure far worse than this. He reminded himself where he was. Gas station. Afternoon. Cameras. Behind them, Olivia's phone kept recording. She narrated without meaning to, voice tight. He's saying he's Navy. The officer won't listen. He's got him pinned to the car. Another person joined her, then another. The lot felt smaller now, the air thicker. Wade's radio crackled at his shoulder, but he did not respond. He was locked into the moment, committed to the choice he had already made. The first upload went live before Wade finished his radio call. Olivia's hands were still shaking when she tapped the screen and hit post. She did not add a caption. She did not add commentary. She simply let the footage speak. The angle was steady. The sound was clear. A man in a white military uniform pinned against a car. An officer refusing to listen. The sharp click of cuffs. The certainty in Jake's voice. The certainty in Wade's refusal. Within minutes, the comments began to stack. Questions at first. Then disbelief. Then anger. Someone recognized the uniform. Someone slowed the video down frame by frame. Someone zoomed in on the insignia and froze it long enough to read the name. By the time Jake was seated in the back of the cruiser, the clip had already crossed state lines. Jake sat still, hands numb behind him, the cruiser idling. He could hear Wade pacing outside, voice clipped as he spoke into the radio again, repeating the same charge, the same justification. Impersonation. Suspicion. Procedure. Jake leaned his head back against the hard plastic and closed his eyes. He thought about how fast things moved now. Faster than orders. Faster than chains of command. Faster than denial. Inside the gas station, Olivia watched her phone vibrate non-stop. Notifications layered over each other until the screen blurred. Shares. Tags. Messages from strangers asking if she was still there, if the man was safe, if this was happening now. One message came from someone she did not recognize, but the name stood out. Active duty. Naval operations. Please do not delete the original file. An hour later, the clip was running on every major platform. By early evening, a communications officer at Naval Special Warfare Command had it paused on a screen, replaying the same 10 seconds over and over. The posture. The cuffs. The voice. They did not need confirmation. They knew. Calls went out quietly at first. To regional commanders. To legal. To public affairs. The language was careful. Measured. The situation is developing. We are aware. We are verifying. By nightfall, the language changed. A senior officer watched the video again, this time with the sound off. He did not need it. He recognized the way Jake held himself, even bent forward, even restrained. He recognized discipline under pressure. He recognized one of their own. The White House briefing book was updated just after midnight. The clip played on a loop in a secure room. Phones turned face down on the table. No one spoke at first. The questions were obvious. Who is he? Why was this allowed to happen? How fast is this spreading? A staffer cleared his throat. This is gaining traction faster than anything we've seen this quarter. Another voice followed. If this is confirmed, this becomes federal. Outside, the internet had already decided. Veterans shared the video with short, furious captions. Civil rights groups clipped it into segments, highlighting each refusal, each shove, each lie. Former officers weighed in, some cautiously, others openly condemning the escalation. The comments under Olivia's post passed 1 million views before sunrise. Jake did not see any of it. He sat in a holding room, wrists uncuffed at last but still aching, staring at a blank wall. An officer he had not seen before brought him water and avoided eye contact. Another asked routine questions without conviction. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was steady. "I want a lawyer." That request traveled faster than any siren. The department's phones rang without pause by the next morning. The chief cancelled a scheduled appearance and issued a statement that said very little. An internal review was announced before noon. Federal interest was no longer implied by mid-afternoon. It was confirmed. The video continued to circulate, untouched, unspun, impossible to reframe. The moment Wade ignored the ID. The moment he forced Jake lower. The moment the cuffs closed. Those seconds became the center of everything. By the end of the day, the story had moved beyond the gas station. It had moved beyond the department. It had reached the point where silence was no longer an option, and explanations would no longer be enough. What began as a single recording in a stranger's hand had become a national question. And every answer would now be demanded in the open. By the second morning, the questions had names attached to them. Hunter Morrison watched the video in his office with the sound low and the door closed. He did not take notes the first time. He rarely did. He watched posture, timing, the moment when restraint crossed into punishment. When it ended, he let the clip replay once more, slower this time, then reached for his phone. "I want the original file," he said when the call connected. No edits. No compression. Across the city, Jolie Jensen was already on her third interview of the day, her answers careful, controlled. She had seen the footage the night before and recognized the pattern instantly. The denial. The escalation. The way procedure was used as cover for something else. By noon, her inbox was full of messages from veterans, former officers, and witnesses offering details they had not yet shared publicly. Jake sat in a quiet room at a different facility now, released pending review, but not free of the weight of it. His uniform had been returned, folded neatly, as if that could undo what had happened while he wore it. When Morrison and Jensen arrived, they did not rush. They introduced themselves. They asked permission to sit. They listened. Jake told the story once, start to finish. He did not dramatize it. He did not soften it. He described the way Wade's hand hovered over his holster. The way the ID had been taken and dismissed. The way the cuffs tightened after he complied. He described the voice telling him to stop resisting when he had not moved at all. Morrison nodded slowly. Jensen did not interrupt. When Jake finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Morrison spoke. "This isn't about one bad decision," he said. "This is about a pattern. And patterns leave trails." The trail appeared faster than expected. Internal records surfaced within days. Prior complaints quietly closed. Use of force reports with identical language. Stops that ended without citations, but with altered narratives. Messages exchanged late at night. Jokes made at the expense of people who looked like Jake. None of it had seemed urgent on its own. Together, it told a different story. Jensen took the lead publicly. She framed the case carefully, not as spectacle, but as accountability. "This is what happens," she said at the first press conference, "when authority is protected instead of examined." Morrison filed the suit the same afternoon. $26.7 million. The number traveled faster than the explanation behind it. Headlines focused on the figure, but the filing itself told a broader story. Civil rights violations, unlawful detention, excessive force, failure to supervise. A department that had allowed behavior like Wade's to repeat without consequence. Jake read the document later that night. He stopped at the parts where his name appeared, where the language shifted from narrative to allegation. He understood the purpose, but seeing it laid out that way made it real in a different sense. This was no longer just something that had happened to him. It was something that would happen in public. The department responded with a statement that acknowledged concern and promised cooperation. Wade was placed on administrative leave before the ink on the filing dried. His badge was collected quietly. His weapon was logged. The language was neutral, procedural. Behind closed doors, it was anything but. Subpoenas followed. Depositions were scheduled. Officers who had once laughed things off now asked for representation. 2 names surfaced repeatedly in internal emails, attached to warnings that had been ignored. Morrison watched the reaction with practiced distance. He had seen this phase before. The tightening, the scrambling, the sudden willingness to talk. For Jake, the days blurred together. Interviews, meetings, long stretches of waiting. He thought often about the moment at the pump, how quickly it had turned, how close he had come to reacting differently. He knew the weight of that choice now. The first call came in quietly, routed through an attorney who did not want his name attached to it yet. He said he represented an officer who had information relevant to the case and was afraid of retaliation. Morrison listened without comment, then asked a single question. "Is the information documented?" "Yes," the attorney said. "More than once." That was enough. Maximus Smith had been with the department long enough to recognize the warning signs. He had watched complaints disappear. He had read reports that did not match what he remembered seeing. He had learned which officers were protected and which were expected to keep their heads down. Wade had always been on the first list. Smith requested a meeting off-site, nowhere near a badge or a cruiser. When he arrived, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with long shifts. He placed his phone on the table and slid it forward. "There are messages," he said. "Texts. Group chats. Stuff he thought would never leave that circle." The screenshots were blunt. Jokes framed as sarcasm. Slurs passed off as frustration. References to stops that never made it into official logs. Language that made clear Wade did not see certain people as citizens at all. He saw them as problems to manage. Smith spoke carefully. "This isn't new. We reported concerns. They were dismissed. We were told to focus on our own work." The second meeting happened the next day. Stella Webb had joined the department believing the rules meant something. She believed in reports, in documentation, in the idea that if something was written down clearly enough it would matter. Over time, she learned how easily records could be adjusted, how a phrase could be added after the fact, how evidence could be framed to support a conclusion that had already been decided. She brought a folder. Inside were copies of reports Wade had authored or influenced. Traffic stops that escalated without cause. Charges supported by items that appeared only after searches. Bodycam footage that began late or ended early. Webb had kept her own notes, dates and times written down the moment things felt wrong. "I didn't want to believe it at first," she said. "But it kept happening. And nobody stopped him." When the messages and the reports were placed side by side, the pattern sharpened. This was not an officer making a single bad call under pressure. This was someone operating with confidence that consequences would never reach him. Morrison reviewed everything twice. Jensen prepared the framing. Neither rushed. This was the kind of material that demanded precision. Jake was informed before anything went public. He listened in silence as the details were explained. The texts, the altered reports, the fact that other officers had seen it and feared what would happen if they spoke sooner. "I don't want them destroyed for doing the right thing now," Jake said. "They won't be," Jensen replied. "That is part of the reason this matters." When the whistleblowers came forward officially, the response was immediate. Wade's name appeared in headlines again, this time attached to words like pattern and history. The department announced an internal audit, then expanded it within hours. Federal investigators requested the full archive of Wade's communications. The tone shifted from damage control to containment. Smith and Webb were placed on administrative reassignment for their own safety. The language used was protective. The reality was tense. Doors closed when they walked by. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. But neither backed down. "I didn't sign up to protect him," Smith said when asked why he came forward. "I signed up to protect people." Webb echoed the same sentiment later, her voice steady. "If this is what it costs, then it costs it." The evidence changed the shape of the case. What had been one violent encounter now stood on a foundation of intent and repetition. It gave the lawsuit weight that could not be dismissed as overreaction. It gave the investigation direction. For Jake, the knowledge settled heavily. He thought about how close he had come to being just another name in a report, another line adjusted after the fact. He understood now how easily his story could have ended differently if no one had recorded it, and no one had spoken up afterward. As the whistleblower's information spread through official channels, the focus narrowed. The questions were no longer abstract. They were specific. Who knew? When they knew? Why nothing was done? The pressure concentrated. It did not ease. Once the whistleblower's material entered federal hands, the pace changed. Meetings shortened. Calls went unanswered. Decisions that once took weeks were made in hours. The department felt it first in small ways. Access requests that could no longer be delayed. Files that could no longer be quietly corrected. Systems that had to be opened completely or not at all. Special Agent Robeson arrived without announcement. He was not loud. He did not threaten. He carried himself with the calm certainty of someone who did not need cooperation to proceed. Blake Fletcher followed an hour later, briefcase in hand, expression unreadable. They met with City Council first. The conversation was brief. The warrants were already signed. The raid began before lunch. Unmarked vehicles rolled into the lot and parked without urgency. Agents moved with purpose, spreading out through offices that had once felt insulated from scrutiny. Hard drives were disconnected. Filing cabinets were opened. Radios crackled with clipped confirmations. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Wade was not present. That absence spoke louder than anything else. Robeson stood in the records room, gloved hands flipping through folders that had not been touched in years. Fletcher watched the bodycam archive load, timestamps lining up with the notes Webb had kept. Stops that matched. Language that repeated. Gaps that told their own story. "This isn't sloppy," Fletcher said quietly. "It's intentional." Outside, officers gathered in small groups, unsure where to stand. Some watched. Some looked away. A few stared straight ahead, as if discipline alone could shield them from what was unfolding. The chief issued a statement within the hour. Cooperation was emphasized. Transparency promised. The words felt thin in the air, already outdated. Jake learned about the raid from a call, not a headline. Morrison's voice was steady. "They're in the building." Jake closed his eyes and let the weight of it settle. He pictured the department as he had seen it only once, from the outside, ordinary and unremarkable. He imagined agents walking its halls now, reading reports that bore no resemblance to the truth he had lived. By the afternoon, evidence boxes were stacked neatly near the exit. Devices were tagged and logged. Requests were made for additional access. The investigation widened, not outward, but downward, into procedures and approvals that had kept behavior like Wade's intact. Robeson paused in an office near the end of the hall. The desk was empty except for a framed commendation and a coffee mug turned on its side. He took a photograph, then another. Not for drama, for record. When Wade was located later that evening, he did not resist. The badge was already gone. The posture was different now. Smaller. The certainty that had fueled him at the gas station was nowhere to be found. Charges were read carefully. Civil rights violations. Official misconduct. Evidence tampering. Each count landed with measured clarity. There was no spectacle. There did not need to be. As news of the raid spread, the reaction shifted again. The conversation moved away from what Jake had done or not done. It focused instead on how long this had been allowed to happen, on who had signed off, on how many times complaints had been closed without explanation. Smith and Webb were asked to give additional statements. They did so without hesitation. The fear that had kept them quiet had given way to something firmer. Resolve. By nightfall, The department was no longer defending a single officer. It was defending its structure. Jake sat at home, his kids asleep down the hall, the quiet unfamiliar after weeks of noise. He did not feel relief. Not yet. What he felt was distance. The moment at the pump already felt like something that had happened to someone else, preserved now in evidence and transcripts. The fallout continued into the next day and the next. More records surfaced. More questions were answered. The story narrowed, then sharpened, until there was nowhere left to hide. The courtroom was quiet in a way Jake had learned to recognize. Not the silence of fear or anticipation, but the silence that comes when all the arguments have already been made and nothing remains but consequence. Wade sat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. The confidence that once drove him through a gas station lot had been stripped away piece by piece over months of testimony, filings, and evidence laid bare. His uniform was gone. In its place was a plain suit that did not fit quite right, as if borrowed from a version of himself that no longer existed. Jake took his seat behind the rail. He wore no uniform today. No ribbons. No insignia. Just a jacket, pressed clean, and the weight of everything that had brought him here. He felt taller than he had that afternoon at the pump. Not because of posture, but because he no longer had to brace for what might come next. The judge entered without ceremony. The room rose and settled again. The charges were read once more, each one familiar now. Civil rights violations. Official misconduct, evidence tampering, abuse of authority. The words no longer shocked anyone. They simply defined what had been proven. When Wade's attorney spoke, it was brief. There were no grand appeals left. No alternative narratives to offer. The record had closed around the truth too tightly. Wade was given the opportunity to speak. He stood slowly. He did not look at Jake. He looked at the judge, then down at the lectern. His voice wavered at first, then steadied into something practiced. He spoke of stress, of misunderstanding, of a moment that had gotten away from him. He did not say Jake's name. Jake listened without reacting. He had learned the value of stillness. The judge did not interrupt. When Wade finished, she paused, hands folded, eyes scanning the room. When she spoke, her voice was even and unadorned. "This case is not about a single lapse in judgment," she said. "It is about a repeated and deliberate misuse of power." She referenced the reports, the messages, the altered records, the choices made after the moment at the gas station, when correction had still been possible and accountability had still been avoidable. She spoke of trust, not as an abstract concept, but as a contract broken with intent. When she announced the sentence, there was no flourish. 22 years. The number landed softly, then spread. Wade's shoulders sagged. His breath caught. For the first time, he looked out into the room, eyes unfocused, as if searching for something that had already slipped beyond reach. He was led away without protest. The sound of the door closing echoed briefly, then faded. Jake did not move. He felt the moment pass through him in stages. Relief came last. Before that came a quiet recognition of what had been required to reach this point. The filming, the speaking, the waiting, the restraint, again and again, even when anger would have been easier. Jolie Jensen squeezed his shoulder. Hunter Morrison nodded once. Neither said anything. There was nothing left to explain. Outside, the air felt lighter than Jake expected. Reporters waited, questions ready, cameras aimed. He stopped short of them, not out of fear, but choice. He had already said what needed to be said. Later, at home, he stood in the doorway of his children's room and watched them sleep. The house was still. Ordinary. Safe. He thought about the uniform folded in the closet, about what it had meant to him before and what it meant now. He thought about the men and women who had reached out quietly, telling him his refusal to break had mattered. Accountability, he realized, was not loud. It was patient. It was recorded. It was earned inch by inch, choice by choice, until it could no longer be denied. Jake turned off the light and closed the door gently behind him. For the first time since that afternoon at the gas station, he slept without replaying the sound of cuffs closing.